On the 24th of December 2006, I had an idea. I was still fairly young and was slowly starting to lose my belief in Santa. Part of me wishes that I had, but at the time I distinctly remember wanting proof that Santa was real. The previous year, I had received my first handheld video camera. It wasn't anything professional, but in the eyes of a 6-year-old, it was something special. If memory serves me well, it had a very good battery life, with a few blank tapes that came with it. My idea was that I would use the camera to capture footage of Santa. On paper, the idea sounded perfect. I'd either have irrefutable footage that he was real, or I filmed two very familiar people doing Santa's job for him. What I ended up filming was neither. As the night of Christmas Eve was starting to draw in, I waited for my parents to leave the living room after watching a Christmas movie. I secretly placed the camera between two cushions and made sure that it was securely placed. I was only 6, so I didn't think about all the things that could have gone wrong with putting it there. I just remember making sure that the room was visible on screen. Come 11:45, I snuck downstairs and crept into the living room. The room was dark, barely lit by the 6-foot Christmas tree in the far corner of the room. I walked over towards the couch and fumbled around for the camera wedged in between the two cushions. Since the camera already had a tape inside, I turned it and hit the record button. Seeing that the room was visible on screen, I turned and walked back towards the stairs, looking behind me as I went. Apart from the slight illumination of red light between the cushions, I thought I had done a fairly good job of concealing the camera. As I got back into my room, I remember this underlying feeling of excitement. I laid in my bed and waited. I wasn't planning on sleeping, but on the off chance that Santa was real, I wanted him to believe that I was in bed, asleep. I must have inadvertently fallen into a deep sleep, because I woke to the sound of a loud thud coming from downstairs. Through blurry eyes, I looked over at my bedside clock, and the dial read 1:24 a.m. I threw the bed covers off me and peered out of my bedroom. What greeted me was the faint glimmer of the downstairs tree lights barely illuminating both the landing and the stairs. I crept out of the room, making as little noise as possible. Upon reaching the living room, I was surprised to see that nothing was amiss. Nothing that I could immediately see anyway. I averted my gaze over towards the couch and saw that the red light was no longer visible between the cushions. I once again fumbled around for the camera, and upon grabbing it, I had this unexplainable feeling of existential dread. I took the camera and rushed back upstairs, making more noise than planned. I got back into bed and saw that the camera was still on. Whilst the camera still had plenty of battery, the tape had been filled. Luckily, I was able to watch the tape from the start using the camera. My mother had already taught me how to use it, and as such, I was pretty familiar with how to operate it. I hit the fast forward button and played through the tape. I was looking for any sign of the big man himself. But about 1 hour into the tape, I was greeted with something else. About 12:45, a man came into view. I remember thinking that it was my father, but this man was not my father. He stood as a fairly tall man, approximately 6 foot in height. He wasn't a particularly large man, but what stood out was the long black coat he was wearing. From the camera's off-center position, it was hard to tell what kind of coat he was wearing, but from what I could see on my small screen, it appeared to go well past his knees. The man just stood there, motionlessly. His face wasn't visible, and he had his back to the camera. I have absolutely no idea how long he had been standing there, but it was an unusually long period of time. I knew this because I hadn't stopped fast-forwarding the tape. Minutes went by in quick succession, and his posture didn't seem to change. The only time I saw movement was about 30 minutes after the man appeared. At this point, the time on the tape read 1:16 a.m. The man broke out of his idle state and pulled out an exceptionally large present from within his coat. He gingerly walked towards the tree and stood there motionlessly, just as he had done before. Not long after, I saw that something about the man had changed. His face was now clearly visible. What was even more disquieting was that his gaze appeared to be fixed towards the camera's direction. What I'll never forget was his face. Whilst the room was dark, the dim tree lights lit up the stranger's face. He had this grotesque smile that seemed far too large for his face. Even through the low-quality footage, I could clearly see that warped smile, and how it appeared to split his face in two. The man then dropped the large present onto the floor, causing it to ricochet and knock over another present. I looked at the time on the tape, and it read 1:24 a.m. I couldn't hear the thud coming from the camera, as I was still going through the tape at a rapid speed. I hit the play button, causing the tape to play the last part out in real time. The man walked towards the couch, picked up the poorly placed camera, and smiled at it for an uncomfortable amount of time. He suddenly snapped his head towards the stairs as the camera showed my feet walking down. Before I was in view, the man appeared to panic. He attempted to turn off the camera, but instead lazily threw it back under the cushion and hid underneath the stairs. Just as I reached the bottom step, the tape cut out. A cold shiver ran down my spine when the harsh reality worked its way into my young brain. That man was still in our house. I heard a creak coming from downstairs and heavy footsteps slowly ascending the stairs. In a panic, I shouted out for my parents. The footsteps increased in speed and got louder, indicating that whoever that intruder was merely seconds from bursting through my door. Just as the footsteps got to my door, I heard my door slam open. The lights filled the room, and my parents stood in the doorway. At this point I was in tears, and my mother came over to comfort me. All I remember after that was pointing towards the landing and shouting, "Man, man." My father looked around nervously and checked every room in the house. We all went downstairs and found the front door wide open. The cold, winter air could be felt as gusts of wind wrapped itself around us. My father looked outside, and from what I could vaguely remember, I recall him telling my mother that there was a tall man running off into the distance. I told them everything, showed them the tape, and we saw the large present that he had lazily dropped off by the tree. I wanted to see what was inside the present, but my father ushered me into the kitchen and insisted that I waited with him whilst he called the police. As I sat by the kitchen table, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the front room. It was my mother screaming and shouting frantically. My father left to go and see what was wrong, but he soon returned with a look of anguish and fear in his eyes. I went to go and see my mother, but my father held me back. Eventually, the police arrived and started an investigation. Needless to say, I never saw that camera again, due to it being evidence. Years have passed since this incident, and I still don't know who that man was, or what the outcome was. My father assured me that the man had been caught, but much like my ever-growing disbelief in Santa, I didn't believe him. I never found out what was in that parcel, but I do know that even officers on duty that night were in shock at whatever it was. My mother hasn't been the same since, and I can't find it within myself to ask her what she saw. It's likely that I could find out through other means, but I don't think I ever want to know. I wish that I had never taken on this experiment, but it probably saved my family and I from something far worse.
Hello listeners, if you enjoyed this story, please check out the author in the description. For more content, leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more sinister readings.